Hello and good evening. I'm Melisa Idris. Welcome to Consider This. This is the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. As Donald Trump returns to the White House as the 47th President of the United States, so does his America First agenda. For Southeast Asia, the echoes of his first presidency leave the region bracing for familiar challenges. But could Trump's second term bring surprises? Well, joining me now to delve further into this topic is Elina Noor. She is a Senior Fellow of the Asia Program at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Elina, thank you for being on the show with me today. What do you think Trump's America First agenda might mean for Southeast Asia? Are you anticipating any shifts compared to his first term?
Oh, start with the big questions as always, right, Melissa? Thanks for having me on again. So I think we should expect some continuity from President Trump's first administration, but we'll also likely see some changes, and I'm sure we'll get into that. I think, though, it's useful to frame our expectations, perhaps with the man himself and his mercurial personality, as well as the unpredictable policies that we saw in the first term that will probably be on show again when he starts work today, I guess, is when we're expecting that. First of all, given some of his picks for his cabinet, I think what we're likely to see is a continued marginalization of Southeast Asia as a region of importance or priority, unless the United States sees something valuable in the region to extract for transactional purposes. The focus in Asia will still be on China. We've seen his President Trump's Secretary of State pick Marco Rubio's testimony before Congress and how focused he is on, first of all, of course, prioritizing the United States safety, strength, and prosperity were the words that he mentioned in his testimony, but also on prioritizing the dominance of the United States, not only in the world, but also over China. And so what we'll continue to see is a viewing of Southeast Asia through the refracting lens of China. We saw in President Trump's first term, there was a lot of hectoring and haranguing of Southeast Asia about China. And I expect that we will see that again this time around. But of course, a big talk in the region is President Trump's promise of tariffs, the meting out of tariffs, both targeted and universal, and that will also obviously have an impact, a ripple effect on businesses in Southeast Asia. Finally, I think, though, that we will also expect to see some elements of transactionalism, as I mentioned. So even though policies may be like juggling balls up in the air sometimes, if there is a deal for the master of the art of the deal himself, President Trump will be open to some non-conventional form of agreement on any particular issue. So I think in short, what we'll see is that anything and everything will be back on the table, although the surrounding of his office with new people, with loyalists, with tech titans will certainly bring a different tenor to his administration.
Okay. Help me understand transactionalism in kind of through the Trump lens. How might that work given his worldview? He has been very dismissive of multilateralism. He doesn't want to commit to U.S., so he doesn't want to maybe put more stock into U.S. commitments into international alliances. But how does transactionalism fit into that worldview?
So I think what we've seen in the past is that even though there was a demonization of China, of North Korea, for example, of other countries that the U.S. has considered itself to be in an adversarial relationship with, we did see President Trump being willing to meet with President Kim Jong-un in Singapore. And I think that was one of the starkest examples of transactionalism, of unconventional foreign relations that President Trump was willing to cross boundaries for, to try to extract a deal that he could make America proud of. Now, Whether that panned out in the end is still up in the air. Nothing really came out of it, but the optics were certainly very attractive for him and to him. And so I think if there was something that President Trump felt that he could get out of that moment, then he'd be willing to consider it. And this is something that Southeast Asian governments, I think, are banking on, though we shouldn't be really pinning our hopes on just that.
Well, you mentioned a little bit about the tariffs. Trump has called himself the tariff man, right? That is this centerpiece of his economic platform. What are you most concerned about this trajectory of this emphasis on tariffs?
Yes, I think this, as I mentioned, will have ramifications, strong ramifications throughout the global supply chains that Southeast Asia is very much a part of. Vietnam in particular has a yawning trade surplus with the United States. It's actually only gotten bigger since President Trump left office. And those around President Trump, his advisors, have well taken note of that and have been advising him to consider meting out these tariffs on Vietnam. I think all countries in the region are already on notice. And what we'll expect to see is that given Trump's admiration for tariffs, he said that tariff is a beautiful word. We will, I think, be expecting tariffs to be rolled out within the first week of him returning to office.
And you mentioned his relationship with the tech titans. How are you reading big tech's embrace of Trump's return to the White House?
You know, this is one of the changes that we are seeing unfold in real time from President Trump's first term in office. Back then, you saw the tech titans to be a little more antagonistic towards President Trump. Now, of course, that relationship has completely U-turned. If you recall, President Trump was actually kicked off the Facebook platform during his first term. And now we're seeing Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, and Jeff Bezos having pride of place on the inauguration dais. And so there's a real shift in terms of the tech and White House relationship. Elon Musk, of course, is one of President Trump's closest advisors, will probably be co-chair of this new Department of Government Efficiency, which of course raises all sorts of concerns about the role of big tech. Big tech on its own is already large enough, but having the ear of the president to, for example, lobby Europe in terms of its regulations of big tech is going to be something the world is watching out for. And of course, the timing of Facebook's decision to do away with fact checkers is also quite concerning, given President Trump's penchant for the truth, as he calls it, and minus fact checking, because a lot of what we've seen without fact checkers on social media platforms has actually negatively impacted the global majority, global South, the most in very harmful ways. And so I think this alliance of technology titans as well as the White House is slightly disconcerting to those who watch these developments like myself very closely.
Okay, and what will you be watching going forward, just specifically with the relationship between the White House and big tech? In your line of work, what are the areas that you will be focused on or watching closely to see how they develop over his tenure?
So I think the loosening of regulations in favor of what, of course, industry insiders call innovation. This unshackling of innovation through a loosening of regulations is something that we'll be watching out for. But also what that means for countries in Southeast Asia that are banking on digital infrastructure, but also digitalization tools, because a loosening of regulations might benefit big tech itself, whether that will filter down to users, consumers such as us in Southeast Asia is something that is still questionable. We're at a very different stage in our digital journey, our digital infrastructure journey than many big tech companies are. And I think that this pro-innovation stance in terms of loosening of regulations will possibly have negative implications for us down the line. What it means in terms of the climate impact. Southeast Asia is a huge data center hub. A loosening of both tech and climate regulations in the US at the behest of big tech will have negative consequences for us in the region, especially if all these rules are going to go out the door.
Elina, I think some commentators have pointed to Donald Trump's first tenure and how he engaged with ASEAN as limited. So they talked about how his tenure was really characterized by limited engagement with ASEAN leaders, ASEAN meetings, minimal attention. Do you think that this, how might I characterize it, this apathy towards the region, towards Southeast Asia might continue? And could that be a good thing or a bad thing? Well, how do we think through how much attention Donald Trump pays to this region?
We got a preview of that with, as you pointed out, his lack of attendance at ASEAN summits. Malaysia, of course, is this year's ASEAN chair. And I think all efforts will be made to bring Donald Trump back to the region, if anything, as a symbol of US commitment to Southeast Asia. I don't think, though, that should be our hopes, aspirations, and dreams. Malaysia has indicated that it will strike out in different directions in terms of taking ASEAN to forge new relationships. And I think this is the right path to take. It'd be a bonus if there were the attendance of the US president at an ASEAN summit that Malaysia is hosting this year. But we've seen that the US really doesn't prioritize Southeast Asia or ASEAN unless it deems it to be worthy of a particular cause at that particular time. And so I think we need to move beyond expecting a US president, whether it's Trump or someone else, to be in the region for a summit of the region. And we should treat the relationship as important, yes, but we should not allow that to be the be-all and end-all of the relationship.
Elina, thank you so much for being on the show with me today. That was Elina Noor from the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. We're going to take a quick break here and consider this. We'll be back with more. Stay tuned. Hi, welcome back to Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris. Let's continue our discussion about what to expect as Donald Trump returns to the White House as the 47th President of the United States. How will the new administration approach matters of global trade and global order? And what will be the impact of these developments to Southeast Asia in particular? Joining us now is Dr. Adrian Ang. He is a research fellow and coordinator of the US program within the Institute of Defense and Strategic Studies at the Nanyang Technological University's S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies. Adrian, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here with us today. Could I ask you, broadly speaking, what you're watching out for in the second Trump presidency? I mean, could his prior experience lead to a more consistent approach in governing, or do you think this unpredictability that was the hallmark of his first term continue?
Hi, Melissa. It's great to be back. Thanks for having me back again. So I think in the second Trump administration, we are expecting both his, mercurialness, as you put it, but I think we will also see a great deal of continuity from the Biden administration. So just really as we saw when Biden replaced Trump in 2021, there was also a great deal of continuity with the Trump administration, especially with regards to US policy towards the Asia Pacific. So,
okay, that's interesting.
So one of the first things, of course, everybody is I think, looking out for has to do with tariffs. So during the campaign, right, President-elect Trump promised to levy 20% tariffs globally on everybody, and up to 60% tariffs on products from China. So right now, of course, we're not exactly sure, to what extent he will fulfill that promise, and whether he, and to what extent he has the statutory authority to in fact impose those tariffs. So he will have some authority based on that he can execute through executive orders, but it's very also likely that some of the tariffs, should he choose to impose them, will have to come through legislation from Congress.
Okay. So is your reading of this that we shouldn't be too alarmed about the threat of tariffs to this region?
I think we should all be prepared for tariffs. And I think most countries in the region have braced themselves for tariffs. So, expect them, but, also, be prepared that, this might be also just, right, the initial bargaining position from the new Trump administration.
One of the things I think that has been quite interesting, the way things have developed, has been the role of Elon Musk in this administration. Can I ask you, Adrian, how you're reading the role of Elon Musk? He has very quickly become an influential voice in the incoming Trump administration. Now he's also a foreign policy actor. What is your read of the role of this man in the incoming administration?
Melissa, that is a great question. As you pointed out, Musk has now waded into foreign policy matters. He has, criticized European countries. He is backing far-right parties in Germany and the UK. So, as we proceed, we'll have to see to what extent, Musk's position on these matters then aligns with the Trump administration's positions, right? Especially, with regards to Europe. Domestically, it is also going to be very interesting because, as we saw in the last week, Steve Bannon, who is and was a close associate of Trump, has now come up against Elon Musk. Right, especially because Musk supports, continued H-1B visas for high-skilled workers in especially in the U.S. tech industry, which puts Musk at odds with a different part of MAGA world. So Musk might be the catalyst for a potential civil war within MAGA world. So I think, we are all looking very closely at this because, this will pit what Bannon calls the techno-feudalists, versus the populist and the nationalist faction within MAGA world.
So interesting developments domestically, particularly with Trump's relationship with the tech titans. But I do want to also zoom out and look at how he might approach multilateralism and kind of global order. Trump has previously de-emphasized or dismissed multilateralism. Do you think we can expect a further erosion of U.S. engagement on these international platforms?
Here, I think, again, we have to be, careful not to read too much into, right, a lot of these statements, because I think, if we look at the broad scope of U.S. foreign policy across both the first Trump administration and the Biden administration, right, we see this push and pull towards multilateralism. Sure, Trump, said all these things to disrupt some of the system, and the Biden administration came in, with this, supposed renewal of American commitment to multilateralism. But if we look more closely, the Biden administration was also highly selective in its engagement with multilateralism. So, for example, the Biden administration was not very welcoming of the WTO. right? I mean, again, especially, USTR, Captain Tai, basically said, that the WTO does not serve, right, America's interests when it comes to trade. So, we also saw in the most recent hearing for Marco Rubio, who is Trump's nominee for Secretary of State, he has also, renewed commitments to AUKUS. So again, right, I think we will see this mixing and matching of selective engagement with multilateral institutions, but also this continuation of engagement with smaller minilaterals, AUKUS and Quad. And, there is now news that there will also be a meeting of the Quad foreign ministers following Trump's inauguration.
All right. Well, what about how Southeast Asia ought to respond to that? When we think about how he viewed Southeast Asia during his first term, I think a lot of that was really filtered through the lens of the strategic competition with China. Might that continue, and how ought Southeast ASEAN position itself when maybe there's more pressure perhaps to pick a side?
So you're absolutely correct, right? I think if the administration focuses on Southeast Asia, it will be through the lens of US-China competition, and sort of, I think more specifically on two potential flashpoints, one in the South China Sea, right? And the second one across the Taiwan Strait. And I would also expect that there will be increasing pressure, I think, from both sides, both China and the United States, to get the ASEAN countries to pick sides. But again, right? But right now, it is not in ASEAN member states' interest to pick sides. So what we should expect to see is, right, sort of greater ASEAN integration, right, to both reinforce and augment its centrality, right? Especially, when we have ASEAN member states, right, sort of flirting with joining other organizations such as BRICS. But I think, this time around, I think that the region is probably also better prepared, I think, at least economically, right, to face any possible challenges from the US in terms of economic measures like tariffs. So we now have RCEP, and I think it is also beholden on like-minded states within the region, right? Especially if we can get Japan to take the lead to foster greater economic integration for Asia.
If I could squeeze in a very quick question at the end, I'm curious to know what you think of Trump's explicit expansionist ambitions in Canada, in Greenland, in the Panama Canal. Adrian, are these empty threats? Are there serious? Is there anything serious behind his expansionist ambitions, you think?
Melissa, that is a great question, and I too would like to know the answer to that. But at least, with I think the underlying point about all his comments, about Canada, about Greenland, and about the Panama Canal is really about potential strategic vulnerabilities for the US. So with regards to Canada and Greenland, it is about the Arctic, and with the Panama Canal, it's about, right, so the strategic importance to the United States of the Panama Canal. So, right, if we sift through Trump's rhetoric, it really is about, right, acute American concerns about strategic vulnerabilities in the Western Hemisphere, in the Northern Hemisphere.
Thank you so much for speaking with me. That was Dr. Adrian Ang from the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies. And that wraps up this episode of Consider This. But more analysis on what to expect in the second presidency of Donald Trump. We're crossing over to my colleague Najib Arif, who is currently in Davos for the World Economic Forum. Stay tuned, that's right, after this. I'm Melisa Idris signing off for the evening. Thanks for watching. Good night.